Youth around the world these days face enormous economic challenges. And for sure, it's a global trend, so Korea is no exception to that. So that's the topic today. What Korea is doing to help and protect its young people regarding economic difficulties. All coming up right here in this program, Upfront.
The global society has been troubled with the youth unemployment issue, and Korea is no bystander to this issue. Korea's youth unemployment rate hit an all-time high in February since 1999. And the unemployment rate in March was higher when comparing it with the same month last year. The younger generation of today have experienced the double whammy of the highest unemployment rate and economic difficulties. In order to get a decent job, young people have to get a student loan, go through a fierce competition to become more qualified workers for the companies, and endure poor living conditions because of the high housing cost. Young people want to get a job to earn money, but they also need money in order to get a job. The younger generation have unavoidably faced a lot of economic difficulties, along with a low employment rate. They have called for the government measures to relieve the financial burden, including the student loans and housing problems. Youth unemployment rate has reached an all-time high, and the younger generation have had to give up so many things. Upfront discusses ways to tackle the economic difficulties facing the youth.
Well, more than ever before, we have a very interesting and exciting lineup of the guests today. Of course, we're starting with one guest who doesn't need much of explanation, our reliable economics expert, economics professor from the Catholic University, Yang Jun-sok. Thank you very much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
And the rest of them, they have their own stories. First of all, Mr. Greg Kuebler. He is a UX designer from the United States who have been in Korean job market. First of all, Mr. Kuebler, UX is a user experience. And then, so what is a user experience designer, very briefly?
It's basically designing how a software or hardware interaction works and how it meets the expectations of a user and making sure it fulfills their needs.
Very frontline and advanced level of technology designer, I suppose. I'm looking forward to your stories. Thank you very much for joining us. And next one is Mr. Ha Hyeog. He is indeed quite a famous figure in Korea in many sense because 2 years ago we have had this interesting story about food trucks. Right. And you are the first founder of food truck business in Korea 2 years ago. Since then, there are some new followers coming into the market now?
Yeah, so many young generations want to start their food truck business because it requires just a little capital. So it was illegal before, but 2014, the government has permit for food truck business. So it's legalized from that. And
so you're the real pioneer in this very exciting growing business.
One, yeah.
We'll look forward to your story there as well. And our last guest is, last but not least, Ms. Yoon Jie-min. Very interesting profession. Some people call it professional tourist. Some people call it tourism communicator, traveling expert, basically what it is. You're a journalist, reporter, and also a lecturer on tourism and traveling. Welcome to the program, and we are very much looking forward to your story as well.
Thank you.
All right, so let's start with the big question here. In Korea, there are so many different issues about the difficulties, economic difficulties that young people face here. From the observation of these young panels here, what can we say in terms of the biggest economic challenge that Korean people and Korean youth face from your own experience? What can we say?
The biggest economic challenge I face right now is I work by myself. I work as an individual freelancer. So the biggest economic challenge would be not having the secure income. So for me, the monthly wage differs by every month. And it's hard for me to save money. It could be somewhat manageable to pay for my living, but it's hard for me to open the bank account for installment savings. So I'm like fighting hard to make my job to have more steady income.
And in that sense, you know, you have experience having been in Korea's job market, right? Any difference, anything different, or is it all kind of similar, looking for jobs in Korea, just like in the United States and New York?
It is a little bit different. I mean, the work culture is different here. But when I'm interviewing with other companies and things, the expectations are still there as far as the ability of expecting working collaboratively with their teams and being a dynamic problem solver.
And Koreans sort of lack, relatively speaking, on that sense, or not?
No, I mean, everybody needs these kind of things from their new employer, or from their new employees. And, you know, to be a team player, especially in the startup community where the teams are smaller, so you have to have a diverse role and, you know, kind of solve different kind of problems. You can't just be good at one thing. You have to kind of be good at multiple things.
Right, right. So in a way, global. You know, there are certain unique Korean sides, but it's kind of an overall global trend, we have to say. Professor Yang, you know, the money problem. You know, as Ms. Yoon Jie-min also mentioned, the expectation for stable flow of income, which is not happening overall, and as a result of it, and as a result of other economic issues, we call in Korea the generation that has given up on so many different things, right? What's your overall observation? Is this unique for our time, or overall observation on this?
Okay, well, it's not unique. I think every generation has been worried about their income, the stability of it, the longevity of how long their jobs, how long they're going to be working for a certain company. I think, though, what is different currently is that because the global environment and the Korean economic environment is so volatile, and in addition, everybody comes to the job market seeking the same thing. They all want white-collar jobs at either a large chaebol company or a public-run company or a government job. So you have a lot of students who are focusing in a very small set of jobs because it is the most stable, it's the most highest paying, that a lot of people cannot help but be disappointed.
Mr. Ha, as a part of a young generation here in Korea, we are increasingly talking about this spoon theory, or you know, some people, the golden spoon, silver spoon, and clay spoon, dirt spoon, whatever you say. In my mind, that sort of indicates the issue of lack of social mobility, right? If you happen to have a well-to-do parents who are doing well, then as a child, for the rest of your life, you're set to enjoy your life. But if you happen to have parents who do not have as much of economic status, then you're bound to suffer. I think that's the overall idea. How real is that thinking in reality? Some people are saying it's all in your mind, it's all psychology. Some people are saying it's really so truly, in a way, it's real. In your personal observation, how real is this issue about social mobility?
In my personal opinion, all the problems start from young age, childhood. So everyone has expectation from our parents, right? So our parents want us to do study well and doing well with social communication or social relationship, but because that we have lack of creativity, so only following and copying other ideas. So, and our parents pushes us to do same things. For example, when age 24 or 5, you have to graduate your university, and at age 27 or 8, you have to get married with someone, and after that, you have to have a baby, something like that. The same route.
Set formula for everybody.
Yeah, set formula, right. So that is the biggest problem of lack of creativity, and because of that, everyone wants to go to major company or get a job in government.
That relates to what Professor Yang was just saying. You know, everyone pursuing the same stuff, and it's kind of competition. Everyone trying to do the same thing. That's why people feel deprivated, basically, right?
If everybody's so hyper competitive for the same goal, then every little difference is going to be have a big result. And richer parents obviously can afford to give slight advantages that seems to be pay off in a big way at the end because everybody's pursuing the same goal. And that is also it's worsened by the Korean job market, which is very rigid. So the popular opinion is that once you get into these good jobs, not only do you get higher pay, but your job is more stable, you're employed for a longer period of time.
Right.
So everybody's pursuing those same goals, and there's just not enough of those good jobs to go around.
Right. Mr. Kuebler, as someone who's coming from outside, as a, observing what's happening inside Korea, is this all pretty much of the problem of mindset? Everyone having the same kind of mindset, or the way you see it, is this more like structure? How does Korea compare with other countries in terms of challenges that youth face?
As far as mindset, yeah, I think you have to drop your expectations of the previous generation because a lot of things have changed. Like technology, kids are growing up with these phones in their hands, and the parents did not grow up with that kind of experience. So therefore, the shift of thinking needs to change as far as like these job types of government jobs and these bigger corporations, which don't solve all the problems that the current youth are facing. So therefore, like the startup scene kind of like are attacking, or not attacking, but they're challenging a lot of the problems and trying to solve really dynamic problems, which they can do because they're small and they're not big and they don't have as much bureaucracy as these government jobs and other big companies, or these big companies economically don't care.
Right.
But
So,
if the youth can like rally around different kind of work environments, they can solve their problems, find some new passions, and find new ways of living their lives and interacting with their peers.
So at the beginning of conversation already we are having here, I think the attitude and mindset kind of seems to play important role in terms of Korea's challenge, Korea's youth challenge here. But let's get into further of the details about exactly what kind of challenges and what kind of problems we face here. Regarding that, first of all, the young people trying to become independent on their own, economically speaking. Some people say, overall, the difficulty in finding employment itself is the big cause. The way you see it, is that the thing, or is it like economic downturn? What's happening here? Would you say the difficulty in finding jobs is the key cause for most of the economic troubles that young people face here in Korea?
Well, I think the fundamental cause of having difficulties in finding jobs is that our society is actually lacking the job diversity. And so our generation have received a standardized education, and we were taught in school that white-collar jobs are making our life stable. So, and we have to fight with the social perception that, as Mr. Ha had mentioned, our parents have told us that white-collar jobs is the only way that you can survive this society. That's why they compete for the similar jobs, and we've never taught that there are other jobs out there that, and they also are not really as appreciated as much as the white-collar jobs are. So I think it's the difficulty that we have been taught in school and during the education of Korea.
So just like Mr. Ha is a pioneer for his own way, Ms. Yoon Jie-min is also a pioneer in a way dealing with that kind of old set perception regarding what you call white-collar jobs, but to be more precise about it is like having a job in a big organization, several companies and public corporations set for the rest of your life, that kind of style. And in a way, you're the pioneer fighting against that kind of belief. Professor Yang, overall, like for example, was it February when Korea had 12.5% youth unemployment, which was the highest ever, they say. And now March figure came out, 11.8%, a little bit lower, but they say as a March figure, it's still the highest. How serious is this macro speaking here, speaking about the macro indicator, and I'm also interested in more competitive as well, like in comparison with other countries.
Okay, well, in comparison to European countries, it's still on the low side. Typically, the unemployment rate for 20-year-olds is higher than the average unemployment rate because they're searching for the jobs that they'll eventually take, hopefully, for the rest of their lives. Having said that, though, some of the factors are worsened currently because of the Korean domestic crisis as well as the global recession. And there has been some recent research which seemed to indicate that if you're a young person who's finding a job in a recession and you take a very long time in finding your job, then you take a permanent lifetime income cut. So that is a very serious problem for the 20-year-olds. Ideally, if you want to avoid that type of income cut, then you have to get a job as quickly as possible, but there just isn't as many desirable jobs available, and the 20-year-olds are very reluctant for good reasons to go into jobs which they think are not worthy.
About that point, however, I wonder, you know, these days the reason why Korea's young people can actually stay out of job market for so long, looking for the exact job that they want, is because they can afford to, isn't it? I mean, it's because their parents can support them. In old days, young people just had to find a job to sustain their living. So doesn't this indicate kind of like increased living standard or overall increased family income level of this country?
Well, not just the fact that they can wait for a long time, but the fact that they can go to college at all. Now, say in the 70s or even up to the 80s, only about 25% of high school students went on to college. So only about 25% of the students had this type of expectation. The other students had much lower expectations. But now, 85% of students are going to college, and the desirable jobs cannot keep up with that pace, even if there wasn't a recession. So you have a lot of students who have this very high expectations because they come out of college, because they put in all this 12 years of very hard work when they were going to school, and now they're being disappointed. And not only that, we've talked about how Ms. Yoon and Mr. Ha got into these different types of original areas. But because most students are spending so much time studying, by the time they come to college and they have to start studying for what are they going to do, what kind of jobs they're going to get. They don't have enough experience to find what kind of jobs they want. So part of the reason why they're concentrating on just very small set of jobs is that that's all they know.
Well, also, I think the colleges don't necessarily know all the type of jobs that are going to exist.
That is so true.
I think in the U.S., the college's fundamental goal is to help students learn how to learn, so that when they do enter the field, whether, I mean, the field I'm in, UX architecture, this is new within the past 10 years. It didn't exist in the colleges didn't know how to teach for that. So it's a different kind of mindset and preparation.
So in that regard, individuals are increasingly more responsible for you know, designing and planning their future in this way. In that regard, I think, you know, our guest, the guest that I'm excited about today, particularly Ms. Yoon Jie-min, for instance, you had a lot of things that you had to go through to be very bold and courageous about designing and planning your own future, right? What were some of the interesting stories that you want to share with us? I'm very curious because in Korea, everyone wants to do the same thing, but you're such an exception. What did you have to go through?
Yeah, I used to work for the Seoul Metropolitan Government, and definitely I was afraid to quit my job. And it was also my dream job to be in there. But what I realized when I was working there is that I've prepared so much, like getting good scores in exam, learning new languages. And when I was inside of that big organization, there was not enough chance for me to show myself within the organization. So I decided to quit my job, and I had some time to contemplate on what I do well and what I'm more passionate about. So after that, I could find the opportunity to create a new job. So
in that sense, you actually went through the things that other people have are trying to go through, and you've done it, you've been there, done that, and then finally you came to a realization, which makes it all the more persuasive because you know what it is like.
Yeah, and I personally believe that the concept of job is changing nowadays. So the big organization, even the government, cannot make you feel stable with this job anymore.
Right.
So changing job between the companies would be easier, and there should be the market opening up for the freelancer. So I thought I need to have a specialty, and I need to have my expert area to survive in this society. That's why I'm kind of figuring out what I can do in the society and what I can create a new market type of thing.
So interesting that you seem to be repeating what I'm saying in the classrooms, telling the students you have to become experts on your own, freelancers sometimes, because this is the day and age of the knowledge economy. But talking about different future planning and designing one's own future, these days in Korea, hot topic is startups and creating your own entrepreneurship. And in that regard, as I mentioned before, you're one of the pioneers, Mr. Ha Hyeog. What was your experience like in terms of deciding to enter the field of creating startup and then creating a new kind of business? What was it like?
The reason why I started food truck business is some bad happening. Before I started my business, around 2010, my parents' business was out of business. So I started with a tremendous debt. So approximately $500,000. So I had no chance to get a job because of that. So I'm a kind of a victim of Korean loan or debt.
System,
financial system. So I decided to start my own business, but I didn't have enough capital. So I just thought about the little capital business. So food truck was best for me.
What food truck then you're saying is a business that does not need as much of an investment?
Yeah, it's just one truck, and I bought used truck, and it cost about just $5,000.
But don't you have to customize the truck, and don't you have to load it with the cooking equipment?
My major was mechanical engineering, so I just made it by myself.
DIY.
Yeah, DIY.
Oh, okay.
It was sad DIY because
DIY,
I didn't have enough money to going to food truck factory.
What about the cooking side?
Cooking side,
engineer,
yeah.
Not a chef. How did you start the food side?
When I was in States, I lived with my roommate. He was from Southern California, southern part of United States.
Okay.
Probably I don't
Mexican
remember
food?
Not Mexican. He's from South Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah, and I lived with him for a year, and he taught me how to cook American food, like Philly cheese steak, and gyros, something like that, and steak. So I learned from him, and I just want to start that food business in my food truck.
Are you paying your ex-roommate about your dividends of your business these days at all?
Yeah, it's going well, very well.
But are you in contact with your ex-roommate and then paying him for the expertise that you got transferred to?
I will do that later.
Eventually. Okay. Yeah. Not at this point.
Okay, it's an interesting thing about startups. First, you need idea. And as I mentioned before, because students are so busy studying, they might not necessarily get these ideas. Second, we talked about this various places in the last year, but when Mr. Hodge tried to start up his food truck company, there was a lot of regulations that he had to go through. So government has not been a help in this case until very recently. And then the third is very interesting, capital. I was talking with a government official in Taiwan a few years ago, and he said, no Chinese wants to work for other people. They all want to start their own companies. And what he was saying was, well, then how do these young people start their own jobs? Isn't it very risky? And he said, well, their family takes care of them if their business fails. And what I was thinking,
that's the safety net.
Right. And what I was thinking about Korea is that, well, if I go out of business starting a new company in Korea, I bring my family down with me.
I see. The financial system.
So, at the very least, these three things has to be addressed. Ideas, government laws and regulations, and then how do you sort of protect the other people from risk so that the entrepreneur himself can take more risk.
Critical point right there. And we are going to, once again, someone who has been watching the system from outside, joining from outside. Have you seen many cases of your Korean friends trying to do the startups, or any observation on that? Anything interesting that you noted?
Most of my Korean friends have studied abroad in the States and brought back their knowledge here in Korea and kind of capitalizing on it because of the, difference of the user base and tech scene. But I've seen some of that from the people that have stayed in Korea mostly. Not so much.
Any big difference between startups, entrepreneurs who are starting their own businesses in the United States on one hand, and then Korean side? I'm sure. Professor Yang already shared observation about what the critical challenges are, but do you notice that kind of the critical difference?
Yeah, even with the food truck scene, the United States had a lot of states have regulations against food trucks and prevented it. Slowly, I think in Washington, they've kind of made some more laws that allow the food truck culture to thrive. In New York, too. For a long time, they were legal, but they just kind of floated by the law, but now they're slowly getting more regulation. So that's kind of similar hurdles that Korea is going through.
From your experience, finance regulations, these were key barriers, but any other kinds of difficulties that you run into running your own business?
The most problem is there's a lack of government support. Like there's no financial program and education and anything, and high regulation. So at the first time, the only permitted place was a park for food truck. So I asked many things for the
public parks usually?
Only just the public parks.
Okay.
So now the situation has changed. It's more than 10 more places you can do your business.
Ever since the end of last year now? Things have been changed?
Since last October, so everything is fine with regulation. But
what are some of the places you can set up your food
university and the stadium and other
many
places.
Other places.
Okay.
So things are changing, right?
As we talk about the government assistantship, as I'm currently preparing to start my own business, I've been searching for the government's assistant program and also been to a lot of presentation, information sessions that government hosts. I think it depends on the type of your business. As Mr. Ha had mentioned, food truck is the new thing. And a lot of government assistantship is kind of focusing on a certain industry like IT or maybe UX also. But the problem, it's better to have more than nothing. And I've been observing that there are a lot of assistant program that government is hosting. But when you go into the specifically, the beginning entrepreneurs are suffering from no income at all. But all those, the government assistantship program that sometimes require you to pay a little amount of out of the assistant program, and you need to go through all the complicated administrative procedures to actually get the funding. So there's no way that I can pay myself with the government assistantship. It's the investment that I get, and I need to pay myself by using that investment to earn money somewhere else. So it's quite hard, even though there are a lot of assistance programs, for the beginning entrepreneurs, it's hard for them to risk themselves or even existing jobs to go into this kind of startup business.
Very wonderful point, and that's something that seems to be kind of common with regard to government actions and what the policy actions needs to be coming along with. And in this regard, we have a short interview with those young people who have tried to organize themselves to ask for better change in terms of policy actions and government policies. So let's take a look at this video, and then we'll come back to continue our discussion here.
It is an organization established by the youth to tackle the youth unemployment issue. Welfare policy for the youth without having the tax revenue as a foundation might impose bigger financial burden for the next generation. We should focus on creating more jobs that can make the youth have reasonable prospects and become economically independent. Therefore, since 2013, we've focused on having an in-depth analysis on the youth unemployment issue and promoting campaigns to better reflect the stances of the youth. A lot of people have been pressured by the time and expenses they need to prepare for getting a job. It is difficult for them to meet the qualifications required by the companies and start working in their 20s. Structural reform should be promoted to reduce the social cost needed for the younger generation to get a job. We've seen ongoing conflicts between younger and older generations when it comes to the employment issue. They should communicate with each other and promote harmony to better deal with the employment issue.
We still have some remaining challenges in terms of the policies for the youth. The government and companies have focused on promoting internship programs for the youth, carrying out vocational training, and supporting young people who want to start their own businesses. However, there is a gap between those measures and the current stance of the youth, as they want to have decent jobs that they can start immediately. Vocational training and internships are secondary measures, and we should increase the number of jobs first. However, we still don't have enough number of jobs. Having more vocational training programs does not mean the increase in the number of jobs. So the government and companies should think of various measures to create more jobs for the younger generation.
Well, this video reminds us about the need for youth activism in a way to bring in changes to our system and so on. Maybe it's a little bit on the side, but in a recent general election in Korea, we saw a huge jump in terms of youth voters' participation here. Mr. Ha, for instance, up until this general election, I suppose, in Korea, they have been saying Korean youth are kind of passive in terms of their organized activities to bring in change to the system and so on. What is your observation? Is it true Korean youth kind of passive and complainers, or do you see more of a possibility of them participating in movements for system change?
I think, in my opinion, the problem is half and half. The problem from our politics and government and the mind among young generation. The biggest problem is, I think, the materialism is a common phenomenon these days.
Right.
Everyone just needs money for living, and I think the happiness is not only for money, but there's other things. But the job and social position and their business is all related with money. Right. So I think we have to, for advice for young generation, I think they have to change their mind to not only focus on money, focus on other activities, right, their hobbies, or their family and relationships. But they, in Korean society, the relationships and social position is all starting from money. So I think that system, I don't like that.
Keeping in mind that philosophical point about the need for broader perspective, we still need to talk about money here, because that's the real hard question we face. But definitely we'll have to keep in mind that big picture. Overall money issue, Ms. Yoon Jie-min, people are saying that you need money to get a job. Like hagwon fees that you have to pay, in terms of your training and stuff. What's going on? Or what do you have to, where do you need this cost? Some people say interview preparation, statement of purpose, writing. What do you do? How do young people spend their money to get themselves to prepare for jobs?
Well, I think these kind of issues that relates back to the lacking job diversity that I mentioned before, because everyone is competing for the same job. So they need to, in order to stand out from the crowd, they need to specialize themselves. So all of them take the same exam and try hard to get a higher score in the same exam. And sometimes they need to look better, so they spend money to get a plastic surgery. So there are a lot of things that students pay to stand out from the crowd, but the problem is that they are spending money on the same thing. It's really hard for them to think out of the box to do something else to stand out from the crowd. And
plastic surgery often makes you look the same with other people these days, right? In Korea, job applications have this kind of photos and they look all the same. These are all result of this money being spent here.
Well, the sad thing is, I once spent a semester reading students' self-introductions, statement of purpose. They all read the same.
Because they spend money to get trained in writing.
Not only that, but even in schools. In fact, I think this brings up an educational problem. In the United States, if you want to write things like resumes or a statement of purpose, cover letters, you learn it in you learn it from middle school. It's basically what I understand. In Korea, because you spend so much time studying for a test, you don't really learn how to write. You don't really learn how to write the way that watch out for what reader wants to know.
Right.
So when I read those statement of purposes, they all stated what I want to say, which had really little to do with how they're going to get employed.
Right.
They're not really hitting the spots what the employers are looking for. And these are type of things that in other countries you learn in the educational system.
Right, right.
So
I disagree as far as the cover letters and the statement. All that stuff is shifting. A lot of companies aren't even looking at that. It's more of a formality, but to really get you hired, it's about networking and standing out in different ways with your skills and talents rather than the formal bureaucratic process.
How do you stand out in Korea in terms of your job search process? What have you observed so far?
How do I stand out here?
You meaning the young people in general. I mean, you're saying the overall this kind of standard procedure and stuff are kind of losing their relative weight, as I understand.
Right. The traditional practices aren't as applicable. So there's a lot more. I know in the States, in New York, a lot of people, have a very advanced Twitter account and other LinkedIn profiles where they're putting more. When they're not employed, they'll be writing articles or whatever specialty that they're working on, or chasing different interests that also are hobbies or extracurricular activities that kind of define you more as a person rather than just your one skill or your one degree point from college.
I mean, this is a fascinating story. I hope we can spend like an hour or extra on this point about job search in Korea, but we have to move on. And Mr. Ha is unfortunately the one who have to take on my next question. That is policy questions, right? I mean, in Korea, 청년수당, youth allowance has been a big issue for quite some time. And as one example, I mean, it all depends on which kind of local government you're talking about. But in Seoul, they say, you've been to Seoul government before, but starting from July, as far as I understand, this year, Seoul government will start paying young people who are out of job, who are looking for jobs, I suppose, in my understanding, every month 500,000 won. And first, they will go to about 3,000 people, and the overall budget that they have prepared is about 9 billion won. Will this make some difference the way you see it? I mean, you're a CEO, you have successfully created your job, but looking back at your experience, this kind of help from the government, youth allowance, 청년 수당, will that make a difference?
Our government is only focused on for older generation. So the financial support program is, I think, concentrate on just the older generation support system.
Old thinking, basically.
Yeah. So for young generation, I think I don't like that amount of money that you mentioned, the 500,000.
500,000, right?
500,000, amount. That is not enough money for just for young generation to or job seekers. So before they support their money, I think more job experience or just a education or guideline for prospective businessmen is urgently required these days, I think.
So basically what young people need is not this kind of little amount of money, but something more substantial based upon which they can plan and build their future, basically.
Yeah, right.
Ms. Yoon Jie-min, would you agree 500,000 a month doesn't mean much?
Well, I think it's better than nothing because I think it certainly is not a fundamental solution, but it's the only way to help young people to survive right now. So there is nothing they can do but spending their last penny into taking their exams or to buy the good, decent clothes to go for the interview. So I think even the small amount of money can help them to actually live their daily life. But the problem for the youth allowance is that there are young people who don't need that. So I think the most importantly, we need to focus on what kind of the standards that we need to have to give more money to more desperate people who are in the needs of 500,000 won.
Very important point in terms of policy design, because we have to be in a positive way discriminating between who really needs it and those people who do not need it.
Like moral hazard.
Right, moral hazard.
The worst case scenario is that every young people get this money and they decide to invest more money on tests, invest more money in plastic surgery, and even though you're spending a lot of money, you're basically relatively just staying at the same level as before. So if you have a more targeted type of a system where you assist people who really need certain type of education, but they cannot get it, or they tried setting up their own business, but they've fallen out of luck, so you give them living support for a limited time. I think that's a much better way of spending the money rather than, say, give money to everybody.
Exactly, and a very critical point in terms of smart policy design. At this point, we have an interview with an expert about this social safety net for youth. So let's take a look at this interview and we'll come back to continue our discussion right here.
Younger generations in Korea have faced a lot of different challenges. Employment issues are one of the biggest challenges, as there are not enough decent jobs that a lot of young people prefer to have. Younger generations have faced severe economic difficulties, including student loan debts and high living expenses. So they are now calling themselves the NPO generation and have had to give up so many things, including marriage and childbirth. The government should strengthen the social safety net, including basic income policy, in order to tackle the housing problem and relieve student loan debts. The most important thing is that we should help the youth tackle those issues by themselves. The government should implement sustainable measures for young people so that they can support themselves economically. Young people have called themselves the NPO generation, and it shows the stark reality and difficulties facing the younger generation in Korea. What kind of future can we expect to see along with the frustrated youth? It would be more difficult to see a bright future unless young people accept the reality and cooperate with the older generation to tackle the current challenges. And in that regard, the entire society should galvanize efforts to understand the difficulties facing the youth and solve those problems by considering the issues at the level of the younger generations.
Okay, now having seen the interview here, let's talk about some of the specific challenges that Korean youth face. First of all, of course, housing. We talk about housing a lot, and housing costs dearly here in Korea. From foreign visitors' perspective, you're a New Yorker, so it's a little bit different case, but housing is a big issue. First of all, technical question, Professor Yang. They say housing deprivation rate. What is the idea, briefly?
Okay, well, they set up this standard, certain square meters of living space per person, whether they have a bathroom that they have an access to or not, and they've figured out sort of the minimal type of housing that you would need to live a decent life, and then they look at how many people are living within that standard. And what a lot of people are concerned about is that the percentage of people, especially young people, who are living within that standard seems to be falling in the last few years. Having said that, though, I don't think you're going to get a lot of sympathy from older people, say people who are in their late 50s or 60s, because, well, if you look at the standards that the government is using or the NGOs are using, and if you look at the standards that those older people have lived, it's actually much better housing than the older people had lived.
Right. So there might be a problem with the consensus in terms of between generations here. Ms. Yoon Jie-min, in that sense, how pressing is this housing issue as a young person? As your lifetime plan, how big is this issue?
I think the housing is very important in for the young couples, because when we think of marriage, the housing is not the problem that we can ignore.
So in that sense, do you see some of your
essential.
friends actually not getting married because they don't have money to secure housing? Do you see that?
Yeah, I think it also relates to the Korean system of housing, as Mr. Kuebler has mentioned, the high rate of deposit. As I mentioned in the beginning, it's really hard for young generations to save money to pay for the high deposit. So it could be possible that we could pay for the rent by monthly from our monthly wage, but it's hard for us to have that amount of money from the beginning of our marriage to have a house or to have a place to live. So, and especially for the people who have jobs in Seoul, they need to have a place to live in Seoul or the satellite cities around. But still, there is a really it's really hard for normal young generation in their late 20s or 30s to actually pay for the place that's in the area and continue to work in this area. So I think it's hard for the young couple to think about marriage when it comes to the housing issue.
Makes so much sense. Professor Yang, we'll just get to a very important point here. I mean, even though this is another topic that deserves maybe another 2-hour discussion, what can be done about this? Do we have a fundamental solution? I mean, we have been hearing about solutions for several decades so far, but in your own view, some of the things that government is trying to do and stuff, be very brief. What can be done?
Okay, basically build more cheap housing.
But isn't that what government has been trying?
It's what they've been trying to do, but partially they've been blocked by gentrification. They don't want cheaper housing in their neighborhood because it drives down property values.
The people who are already living there are opposed. Okay.
And there's a sort of a balanced country aspect of it. They don't want all the housing to be built in Seoul. Problem is, all the people want to live in Seoul because a lot of new businesses.
That's where jobs are there.
That's where the jobs are. That's where the jobs are because there are network effects. There are increasing returns. But politicians, they don't want to acknowledge that because, well, a lot of politicians are based in the countryside, and having a population more concentrated in Seoul means that they lose their seats.
Right.
So we have a lot of unused housing in the countryside, whereas in the Seoul we're having shortage of housing. So fundamental answer to this is more housing within traveling distance of Seoul. And that's going to take years.
You're talking about the further expansion of the greater Seoul area?
Maybe not greater expansion in terms of area, but certainly more concentrated housing. And it might even have to be smaller spaced housing, so no more big apartments, but just smaller housings, just designed for 20 and 30-year-olds. But giving more money, subsidy for housing, it's not going to do much unless the supply increases.
Okay, supply side, the public supply will be a key thing, even though technically it'll be difficult.
It'll just raise the rents if you give them subsidy without raising the number of the
That is so
apartments.
true, right. So we have to move on to another youth economic challenge here, that is the student loan. United States is infamous in terms of student loan problems and issues. Can you compare your experience in the United States in terms of student loans there and then what you have observed here? Is there differences?
I don't know exactly what the level of the student loan debt is here, but in the U.S., in the States, a lot of the kids now have an incredible amount of debt. The debt is going higher and higher, and with the current president and the upcoming elections, I think a lot of young adults are trying to want reform there. They want loan forgiveness or different rules and regulations to help ease the debts that they're having to start out with, which, having $80,000 to, try to get your first job is a difficult task.
Right, so it is a very global phenomenon or issue that we are talking about here, but from our experience, any one of you here, how serious is this student loan problem in Korea? Do we already have too much of a burden coming from the high tuition? How serious is it? Some people are saying it's very serious, some people are not, in comparison with other countries. What's your observation?
Before they going into the society, they just start with debt from university. The next step is housing expenses and other things. So the tuition is too high, I think, in Korea compared to state university. So
as a personal observation, you do believe tuition is too high, and the problem is there. In that way.
And their parents is not afford to pay their kids' tuition.
Increasingly so, in that sense. Very interesting observation. Professor Yang, from your perspective, how much sense does it make, and fundamental solutions, once again, you're the person we go to for fundamental solutions here, but about the student loans, what can we say?
Well, even today, even with all these problems, it still pays to go to college. That's why most people go to college.
It's economic calculation.
But the premium for going to college seems to be falling, which I think is, in the end, a good thing because it forces the students to look at alternate...
Basically, return on investment?
Return on investment, it's still positive, it's still fairly high for a college education, but it's falling. Now, having said that, now, if we had a part of the problem is, I think, as soon as students come out of college, they're expected to start paying back. That's a problem with the United States as well, I believe. And because of the current job market and because of the low pay for a lot of the jobs that these new graduates go into, they cannot afford to pay the loans back as soon as they graduate. So we need some measure to sort of hold them over, to switch them into longer-term loans.
Don't we already have that kind of extension period? What do you call it? There is a term for it, but I'm forgetting. But don't we already have that?
They've started using that. They've started using that, but a lot of students do not seem to be using that system for some reason, which is why the problem is so serious. And I think the situation keeps on getting worse in the sense that, well, when they make these policies, they figure typical students will be unemployed for X amount of time, but it turns out in reality that it's getting longer.
I see.
So that's another part of the problem.
And unfortunately, we have already run out of time. We have to wrap up our discussion here. But with enough words with Professor Yang, we will have to go around the table here, asking you, our young people here, your vision for the future. What would you like to see happening in your field of profession so that you can have exciting life ahead? The food truck business, the traveling journalism, and the UX design. What would you like to see happening to you and to your field of business in Korea?
As far as like the UX ecosystem,
very briefly.
Yeah, it would be good to see them expand more and having more youth like actually part of the system as part of the startup scenes and taking more of that risk-taking culture. So
you're saying we need greater awareness about the field of UX design?
Yeah, I mean, it's always good. It's a growing thing. It's very important in the States and elsewhere, and it's definitely considered here, but it could be user-centric design expanding here as part of that understanding what the needs are, what the problems are.
Makes perfect sense. We are short on time, but Mr. Ha, you know, in your experience, in your field, what would you like to see food truck business happening in the future?
I think it's blue ocean market in Korea. It's
still blue ocean?
Yes, still blue ocean. And few blue ocean market in Korea, right? It's all competition in every field.
Right.
Especially manufacturing is really tough condition nowadays because of China. But the food truck business is selling food, and they can start with little capital. But I think this is the best thing for food truck business.
I see. So you're inviting even more participants into the market because it's promising. Nice and encouraging words. And Ms. Yoon Jie-min, what would you like to see happening in your field of business and your future?
I wish the government should realize the importance of job diversity, like teaching not only youth but also the students to open their eyes up to the new market and new creation. The youth will never stay as youth. They will grow and they will become the driving generation of the national economy. So I think it's time for us to actually invest in the money for the future and the young generation.
I guess that's wonderful closing remarks one can have for this program. It just shows what a wonderful program we have had today, and for that reason I want to thank all of you big time for your wonderful contribution. And I'm quite certain that our viewers who have joined from all around the world have learned a lot about this challenge this country faces as well as the world faces in terms of youth economic challenges. But you have some idea now what can be done and what we will try to do in terms of making difference for the future. And so for that reason, I want to ask our viewers to join us once again, when we talk about these kind of issues that matters for Korea as well as the world. And until then, this has been Kim Byung-ju, and goodbye.